There you go.
We are live. Okay, so today is September 20th, 2022. I'm calling to order the Common Council Ordinance Committee's regular meeting of this date. It is 7:02, and I'm going to just note which of our members are here. David Hoovelman, Josh Goldstein, Tom Livingston, Dominique Johnson, Nora Najelski-Eitner, Brian Meek is here, and an extra Common Council member, Jen McMurr, has also joined us this evening. Our first order of business is the public hearing on the cannabis ordinance, which is known as regulation of cannabis. It doesn't have a statute number as of yet. So if there are people here who would like to be heard on the cannabis ordinance, if you would please raise your hand. Yep, and Brian will let you one at a time.
Lisa, do you want me to read? I got an email. I'm going to read that one in first before anyone else speaks. This way we can make sure we don't forget about that one. So I'll do that right now for everybody.
Thank you.
All right. This is from Catherine Froelich. Good afternoon. This email will likely be too late for the meeting, but I hope the message will be taken into consideration regarding the upcoming ordinance vote. Judging what is happening next to my residence, in parentheses condominium, people do not seem to be remaining at home to smoke cannabis, nor in their own driveways, streets, or neighborhoods, rather driving to other locations where it blows right into our windows, filling up our apartments as if we were smoking it ourselves. Should we have to live with our windows closed all the time, paying extra for air conditioning for their right to smoke wherever and whenever they please, or should we have the right to fresh air and they be limited to their own homes with closed windows, not bothering anyone else all hours of the day and night? Don't get me started on the blasting radios accompanying all this. Sometimes when we either call down and ask them to move away, in parentheses, often several times a day, they might. More often they can be quite belligerent, and most of the time I have to walk down 2 flights of stairs out into the street to ask, not knowing what might happen or what other drugs are involved. Just recently, I was hit in the face with what police told me was likely some kind of disintegrating gel pellet shot out from some device that stings just for asking someone to keep the noise down and move down the street. When is it going to be something worse than that? Too many people these days are carrying around too much anger. Thank you for reading, Catherine Froelich. Hopefully I pronounced her name correctly.
Great, thank you.
Yep. Does anyone from the public wish to speak on this? If so, please raise your hand so I know who to allow to talk. All right, so I'm going to start with Rich Bonifant, who raised his hand first. Rich, I believe just unmute yourself, and I believe the floor is yours.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
I can hear you, Rich.
All right. Look, thanks for holding the hearing. I listened last night to a panel, and it seemed like they only dealt with the questions they wanted to hear. And a side note is, I think the council's been hiding behind Zoom way too long, because you never see any constituents. You haven't seen a constituent at a public meeting in 2.5 years. Anyway, last night they talked about equity and the impacted neighborhoods from past drug initiatives, okay? The war on drugs. Well, then Steve Kleppen from the zoning said, well, we're gonna put the 3 retail establishments on Westport Avenue, Connecticut Avenue, and Main Avenue, because this will help with the traffic flow. Well, you know, come on, put it in the neighborhood that got impacted with the drugs in the first place, because personally, I don't want it on Westport Avenue. I live close to that. So I think it's your job to tell zoning where you want it, and not have it the other way around. All right. And let's recognize this for what it is tonight, that it's a public hearing because it's a required box you got to check off, and you already know what you're going to do anyway. So, but I just wanted to weigh in on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rich. Lisa, we have a message from Margaret Watt. She says she's planning on speaking, but she's wrapping up a board meeting right now and she needs a few minutes.
Okay. Are there other people who would like to be heard at this time?
If anyone would like to speak, please raise your hand. Rich, you can lower your hand.
And then you can move Rich back off of the, he's not a panelist anymore.
Right. Okay, we have Marjorie would like to speak. I'm going to allow Marjorie to go next. She was the next person to raise her hand. Marjorie, the floor is yours. Just unmute yourself and you should be able to speak.
Hi, good evening. I had heard that there's going to be public places where people can smoke pot, weed, cannabis, whatever fancy term you want to put on it. So I would hope that any money that is made off the sale of this would go towards maintaining those areas and that money not come out of the parks budget. Did you hear me?
We
Yes.
did. You have
And how many places are we talking about that people are gonna, areas where they can smoke cannabis? How many are we talking about?
Well, generally speaking, during the public participation, we don't answer questions, but if you stay for the presentation, we'll talk more about exactly how that's going to be handled underneath this ordinance.
Perfect, thank you.
You've got it. Great. Thank you, Marjorie.
Marjorie, do you have anything else? No? Okay. Would anyone else like to speak? If so, please raise your hand. Besides Margaret, who's already told us she'll be speaking. She's just wrapping up a board meeting.
So if you'd like to take this time, Brian, to try to move Rich and Marjorie out of the panelists section and put them back as participants, we can use that time for that. And then,
They are not panelists right now.
okay, so they're just,
They're under attendees.
oh, okay, gotcha.
Yep.
There seems to be a question and answer. Oh, okay, that's from
It's from Margaret.
Margaret, yep. I don't really want to necessarily dislodge our presenters. Josh, how do you feel about closing public participation and reopening it for Margaret to be?
I'm fine with that, and we might as well take the time to like go through the minutes. And
I
do
think
that.
Margaret just said, she can do it now.
Great.
So I will allow Margaret. Margaret, just unmute yourself. You should have the floor.
Hi, guys. Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Oh, thank you for, I'm so sorry about the overlapping meetings. So I'm, for the public record, I'm Margaret Watt, 41 France Street, here as a professional and leader of the Norwalk Partnership, which is our community coalition to prevent substance misuse and promote mental wellness in youth and young adults. The Norwalk Partnership, which I'll refer to as TNP, is the state designated council in Norwalk for any work related to substance use prevention. So we bring all the different stakeholder groups together in our overall coalition, and we do have a marijuana subcommittee. I'm really grateful to Josh for being a present member, strong participant in that work. Steve Kleppin's been involved, health department and everyone else. And I want to start by thanking you all for the diligence and care you've taken in delving into this subject matter. And also, in allowing TNP to provide resources and strategies in this work. We've had a lot of conversations around the table about the ordinance, and I want to just kind of weigh in with a few thoughts on maybe some of them are wording of the current finalized, being finalized ordinance, and some might be more matters that we do have to pay attention to in implementing it. So one thing is I've been sort of thinking about having the mayor be the person who designates the space for public consumption. And I've found that odd from the beginning. I understand the rationale, which is that there are so many municipal groups that would have a say in the matter, like police and Parks and Rec, Health Department, DPW, and they all report to him or, in future her potentially, but they're hired staff and he's an elected official. Maybe it's intentional to make the elected official the lightning rod, but it also highly politicizes things. I also feel like our country has seen examples of some very polarizing and elected officials in the past. So I want to suggest that maybe there should just be a committee representing the key departments that makes that recommendation. And if not, then maybe the ordinance should have some kind of checks and balances type of arrangement. So like if, the mayor goes out ahead of any kind of public opinion and says something, then there is some other way to counteract that. I want to comment on the enforcement section and whether we should have higher fines for subsequent offenses. The fines for people violating, use in public parks and so forth are low, but what if people keep doing it? For example, we've had a vape shop in Norwalk that's already been cited 8 times because clearly the fines are just very affordable and just part of doing business. Also, I know we've talked about this with Josh, but in terms of the fines section, our concern is really preventing underage use, and the state cannabis law has essentially no consequences for teens who would use or be sold marijuana. It does not, the fines, there are no consequences. It doesn't even match that consequences for alcohol. So I think it's worth considering whether we as a city can just say we are going to treat marijuana the way we treat alcohol in terms of underage consumption. And a little bit more on enforcement is just to raise, for anyone listening, to raise the idea that we're asking police to monitor and then report out. The ordinance asks police to report out on violations of how cannabis is, the law is implemented in our city. But there's no funding or extra support for them to do this. And so we're going to have driving violations like DUIs. We're going to have sales violations. We're going to have public consumption violations. I don't see how they're going to monitor any of that, let alone report out. I'm sure they can do compliance checks at the 3 allowed cannabis establishments. However, 3 community members this past weekend went and visited vape shops in town and asked for THC and were given THC at 2 of the 3. So those aren't places that to my knowledge have applied for a license, right? So if you have to monitor every bodega in town, it's going to be a big job. So that's enforcement around sales. Another issue that we as a city are going to really have to figure out is enforcement around advertising violations. There's a billboard on top of a preschool on Westport Ave that is an illegal advertisement for marijuana, for medical marijuana dispensary. It is not any state or municipal employee's job to monitor those violations, report or redress them. So right now it's members of the Norwalk Partnership Coalition who continue to report these violations. We thought we got somewhere with them because they took the sign down and then they put it up facing the other way. So, when DCP was here last night talking, they did not address that. That has been a concern with Lamar Advertising statewide, and they have been not good partners in this. So some of that goes to the fact that, that's a prevention thing, right? Like preventing kids going to any school from seeing marijuana be normalized. That's part of the state law, but no one's responsible for doing anything about it. And that's where prevention comes in, and policing. Neither of those are funded anywhere in particular under any of the state or local ordinance. And so I think the special cannabis account that you're setting up is a wonderful idea to make sure money doesn't get diverted into the general fund. I think whether in the ordinance itself or in the implementation by community services, it's going to be critical to allocate funding to prevention and policing, the 2 things that needs are going to increase the most. And I also wonder if the ordinance should specify where the eventual state money will go, because the state is going to have a prevention and recovery fund starting in year 3. And they're still figuring out how much of that money stays at the state level, goes to the region or towns. If, we're advocating for money to go directly to towns and cities, so shouldn't the ordinance specify that should then also go into the cannabis account? I also, in terms of the account, one thing I was looking at in the language is specifying more about how it's used, because right now it says that it, has to be used. It says sort of how it has to be used and how people would apply for it. It doesn't mention any establishment of strategies around the use of the money. It talks about guidelines from community services, which sound like application guidelines, but I feel like there should be a process of looking at what are our priorities for funding for using this money in the next couple of years. Because, for example, the Norwalk Partnership has a long-term, marijuana prevention strategy, but other organizations might as well, or other departments. So I think there should be priorities and strategies mentioned in the ordinance. And I think we should mention in the ordinance, when does that money have to get used? I was on the state board a few years ago when we had funding that got identified from a similar, structure, but it was for use at the state level, and it all went into an account. And there was this huge discussion about, do we have to use all the money every year? Do we want to decide to maintain a certain percent in there all the time so that it can grow?
Margaret, I don't want to interrupt you, but everybody's to have 3 minutes, so we've given you a little bit of extra time. So I just want you to get to your main point. If
This is my last point, Lisa. So sorry. Yeah,
I just want to be respectful of other people here for the public hearing.
absolutely. Yeah. So that's my last point. So it's basically, I think there's some more details we could put in the ordinance around that so that it's clear. The money doesn't sit there forever. And also it doesn't maybe all get used up, but the needs that we're going to see in terms of prevention and policing, like anything we can do to fund that through the ordinance or in its implementation would be important. And, the other comments about like the mayor and so forth are really suggestions around the ordinance. So thank you.
Great. Thank you for your thoughtful comments. I know you've spent a lot of time thinking about this. Are there
Thanks.
any-
We have another speaker, Lisa. Lisa is going to speak next. Hold on, let me mute Margaret. And one more, and then Lisa, you'll be ready to go. Hold on one second. All right, Lisa, are you there? Lisa?
I see her trying to connect, but not sure if she has done so. While Lisa's trying to connect, I'm going to note that Darlene Young has joined our meeting, another council person for the minutes.
I'm trying, Lisa will be rejoining the webinar as an attend. Okay, I'm trying to get her to speak. Hold on one second. Where's Lisa? All right, Lisa has an older version. I'm gonna have to promote her to panelist so she can speak. I just did that, Lisa. Can you hear us?
She's connecting now, I can see.
Oh, okay.
And if not, I guess we could have her put comments in the chat, but that wouldn't be as ideal, right?
Lisa, are you there?
Can she connect by phone?
Let me see it. Maybe, hold on. Let me see if I can write her a message. Lisa, are you there?
Her audio is not connecting.
So Lisa, if you can hear us, there should be a telephone number associated with this Zoom invite, right, Brian, that she could call in on? Is that what
Yeah,
you're?
hold on. Is Lisa, I think she might have dropped out of the meeting.
Let me just see.
I can give the number, but I need her to come back on.
She might be coming back on because I don't see her in the list of it. Let's see. I don't see her in the list of attendees, but I do see that there's another hand up. So perhaps we should take that comment while Lisa tries to reconnect.
Okay, if Lisa comes back on, I'm just going to interrupt so I can give her the telephone number because I've tried to allow her to speak and it's not allowing her to speak. It's saying she has an older Zoom function. So Nicole, just unmute yourself. You should be able to speak.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Awesome. I'm actually with Lisa and I ran downstairs to switch onto my phone. So it was me speaking on her computer.
Okay.
But yeah, my name's Nicole Hampton. I'm a person in recovery from mental health and addiction, as well as a mother in the community and a member of the local prevention council, the Norwalk partnership. And I just have so many concerns about this ordinance, especially about the transparency among the community. You read a lot of comments online and stuff, and everyone's talking about dispensaries. But I just wanted to know if we could if you can add a section in the ordinance that this is not a dispensary that you guys are opening. They're cash storefronts where you don't need a medical marijuana card. And then the fact that there's no cap on the THC vape cartridges or money for prevention. I applaud the city for their work with the local community partners and providers and stuff, but there's no money for prevention until fiscal year 2024. So is the city willing to kick in money to pay for prevention before this becomes a really bad, huge problem? And then there's stuff in the ordinance about the cops enforcing any violations, but their hands are tied. They can't even pull anyone over unless they witness that person smoking marijuana actually hit something. So, some of the stuff in the ordinance is just confusing to me. And then like Margaret mentioned, the local vape shops that are already selling THC products, like I know they get fined, but how many times do they get fined before you shut them down? Like, is there a limit or is it just like unlimited fines because they don't care? They're making so much money off of these THC products that $1,000 fine here and there, they really don't mind. Or like, is the city actually going to shut them down because they keep violating, the laws and regulations or whatever that are in place? And lastly, I just wanted to know thank you for the town hall meeting last night. I just wanted to know if you could put the link in the chat. The lady last night from DCP had mentioned warning labels for recreational cannabis, but I still couldn't find it on their website. So I know she mentioned that she was going to send out that link. So I just wanted to ask if you were able to put that in the chat tonight. And that's pretty much it. And I know, it really doesn't matter what my concerns or opinions are because this is already set in stone and you guys have no intentions of a referendum. So thanks for letting me talk.
Nicole, I have one question. So you're speaking on behalf of Lisa Britton or?
No, on behalf of myself. We just happen to be at her house.
Oh, okay. So is she going to jump on your computer? So she can...
Lisa's raising her hand, Lisa. So
she's back. Okay. I just wanted
yeah,
to
Oh, okay.
share computers.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Nicole.
All right. Thank
So
you.
is Lisa going to speak on that one or should I?
I think we're going to let her in on her own. That's what I discerned from Nicole.
All right, hold on. We're going to try, Nicole, if you could just lower your hand. And Lisa, I'm going to allow you to talk. Let's try this again. Lisa, if you can unmute, you can speak.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Well, wait, two Lisas. Before we go there, I see Abigail's been unmuted has been put into the, did you mean to do that?
No, it was the thing was jumping around.
Okay, great. So we're going to have Lisa
So,
speak.
yeah,
Gotcha.
Lisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Apologies for our browser problem we had there a little bit. We switched browsers. I just wanted to echo my concurrence with the previous speakers, and I'll keep it short and sweet. Obviously, decriminalizing, marijuana and a host of things, spot on with all of that. My biggest concern is that as we think that there's going to be so much revenue associated with the retail locations, my concern, which I've expressed before, is that designating these public spaces across the city, I think is going to end up becoming, that's where our money is going to be going, rather than to some of our wonderful social programs that we all aspire to with the revenue, that we're going to end up having some ordinance issues in terms of enforcement. And we spent, how long did it take us to ban cigarette smoke and cigar smoking in public spaces? And I fear that this will become a nuisance. And a lot of the revenue that we think we're going to be making in terms of these sales is just going to create quality of life issues and other administrative problems for the city. So that's all I want to say on that. And again, I apologize for our browser issues. There's 3 of us here at my house looking to comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. Lisa, just so you know, I have an email from Ginger Katz. I'm just going to read it in.
Okay,
Hi, Margaret. Just to let you know that I cannot make the meeting tonight at City Hall on Zoom. I am presenting at Stanford at St. Joseph's. If you get to speak, please say that I'm very sorry I can't be there, but I'm presenting, sharing my son's Ian's story, invited to, in parentheses, invited to Stanford, and that I believe that marijuana led Ian to drugs that killed him even back then when the THC was much lower, in parentheses, 25 years. And that is why prevention is key. If you want to add that, my concern is this: there aren't any warning labels on packages mandated for recreational MJ stores. Perhaps they are mandated for medical MJ dispensaries. MJ is marijuana. And we are not talking about that. We're talking about MJ marijuana stores that are selling recreational MJ marijuana. Totally different. Thanks so much, Ginger.
Brian, we need to move Lisa off the panelists.
Okay, hold on.
No. Because she's not even muted. She's making,
All right, I'm doing that.
somebody's not muted.
And then I have a question. I don't know if you all saw the question in the question answer section.
I did, but it wasn't identified by a resident, just by a letter. So I don't know how we should handle that. If that
Well,
person would like to
I
make a
believe the
comment-
resident's here. So if
I was
that
gonna- I
person
was
would like to,
just gonna say, if that resident would like to raise his hand and make that, or her hand, we don't know. Or if they want to identify themselves in the chat as a Norwalk resident with their full name and address, we could allow that. We'll give them a minute to do that. Did they raise their hand, Brian?
no, not yet. Maybe give them a minute. The person, it's T down at the bottom of the attendees, T.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that
Without a
person-
name and address, I don't think it's appropriate to take a public comment under
Okay.
those circumstances. Okay, is there
Hold on
anybody else who would like to be heard, including T?
You have a Catherine Snedeker is on Lisa Brinton's computer. She just put it in the Q&A who would like to speak.
Okay, hold on one second. I'm just saving the last email so I can attach it to the agenda, to the backup materials. Catherine Snedeker would like to speak on Lisa's computer. Okay, hold on one second. Catherine, are you there?
Hello, hi, this is Catherine Snedeker on Lisa's computer. I'm a resident, a 28-year resident of Norwalk, Connecticut. I have raised 3 boys in the city. I am over 3 decades sober and have one of my children now 3.5 years sober, who struggled terribly with an addiction to marijuana and a suicide attempt after a great deal of struggle. And while I do know that there are people out there that it works for, also as a mental health counselor and therapist with professional sober coaching training, there are people out there that marijuana makes incredibly anxious and really is very destructive to their lives. So as someone that's lived this as a parent, as a therapist, and as a peer, I really ask that any money to be gained from marijuana sales are put aside to provide counseling and support for those whose lives are damaged, destroyed by marijuana, and at the point at which the deficits, the damning side of the downsides of the drug are equaled out with the positive, then the money could be used for something else. Insurance companies don't cover rehab or therapy or support for marijuana because it doesn't kill you in the way that they view that if you come off alcohol and you're detoxing, you need a detox. So it's really important. It's very, and a number of several families whose youth were struggling with marijuana addiction. We sat down with Bob Duff several years ago and brought this up. And it's very difficult because we're going against big tobacco that seized money and a generation that was specifically watched marijuana on all their TV shows. As a 55-year-old, we grew up with cigarettes. My 20-something sons grew up with marijuana being exposed. So we're fighting big tobacco. So my real concern is that the gain, the profits of marijuana sales be put aside to help those families struggle with the dangers of marijuana. And at the point at which everybody's taken care of, then it can be used for other sources. Thank you for the time, and I yield the floor.
Thank you very much. Okay, one last question about whether or not there's anybody else in the attendees who'd like to be heard tonight. Any other hands, Brian? Oops, you're
Yes, Catherine had raised her hand. Catherine had raised her hand, but now her hand is down, so I don't know if that was a mistake. Yep, Catherine's hand is raised. Hold on one second. Catherine, unmute yourself and you have the floor.
Sorry, from my end, I can't see if my hand is up or down. That's why. I did submit a question on through email, but hearing what other people are saying, while I do not have an addiction problem, so I cannot speak from their point of view, I do happen to live next to a street, a dead-end street, where it is a constant problem that people, both from the area and quite a few from out of the area, come down thinking that they are not being seen and hang out here in droves, smoking marijuana and blasting their radios and various other things. And it all drifts right into our windows. So it hits me as I hear the other people speaking that thankfully are now sober, but dealing with children, things like that, that's almost similar to somebody going out for a soda and somebody has spiked their drink, because how do you deal with that for somebody who has is either struggling with drugs or has a long time sober, and somebody sitting outside their window smoking into their window? It's like they're just getting high again. That's an issue. It's not through any fault of their own, but it's a risk that they're innocently drugging because somebody right outside of their window is smoking right into their window. So that's quite a concern. As far as use of marijuana in the streets, even though it's not, how do we deal with something like that? We can't necessarily live, all of us, closed into our homes.
Thank you, Catherine. Any further comment that you might have?
Well, I have considerable concerns about it. It's not just a matter of somebody getting high without wanting to get high. You have to touch on allergies and all of those things. It comes down to quality of life, of course.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your comments. Is there anyone else in the queue, Brian? And you're muted.
Yes, Catherine Catherine lowered her hand. Diane would like to speak. Diane, unmute yourself. The floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. Diane CC, Olmsted Place in Norwalk. I'm a bit confused, honestly, and I don't know if you'll be addressing questions tonight. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend the town hall meeting. I know that was meant to address questions and clarify things. I was a little confused about that as well, since it was an initiative that apparently came from the mayor, but be that as it may. So I think there's a couple of issues here that I'm confused about how this ordinance came to be, and I haven't been following it. it's hard to do so, to attend meetings or follow up in minutes and things like that and videos. But I'm curious as to why Norwalk is pursuing both the sale of legal marijuana within the city, especially as I understand it, there are a number of surrounding communities who have either already chosen not to do so or will be choosing not to do so. And so why should we be kind of like the path of least resistance again for something that's it's a drug? And it seems to me that it's not being regulated in the same way in terms of sales and control, even as we do liquor. So I'm not clear on why we're considering that within the city. And the other thing that I'm not clear on is the portion of the ordinance where I think you're deciding on exactly where someone can use recreational marijuana within the city limits. And my concern would be that unlike alcohol and I guess other drugs, people who are passive participants there in any kind of a public space would be subjected to marijuana smoke. And there would be little that they could do about that in the public realm. And so if part of what you're looking to do with this ordinance is determine where exactly in the city people can partake of smoking marijuana versus something that's in food or whatever. My question would be, why wouldn't it simply just be that you can enjoy it within your own home, on your own private property, and not anywhere within the public? So having said all that, I may have completely missed everything about this ordinance, and maybe I have it all wrong, but my concern would be, I'm not sure why it's being considered. I don't know what the benefits are. I don't know exactly if this is a tax revenue generating scheme. If so, just how much money would that be? And I think a prior speaker also mentioned that whatever funds would be coming into the city would be negated by the type of funds that would be needed for enforcement in terms of violations and, in terms of the police having to respond to complaints. So I think it's a good idea that if there were funds that are generated by this, which I don't, personally, I don't think that we should allow it here, but I think those funds should go entirely to back to the community for resources for drug abuse and rehabilitation. But I don't see how any of that can happen in reality. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Cece. Any other hands up at this time, Brian?
I do not see anyone else's hands raised.
So seeing no further hands raised, I will close the public hearing. And I'm going to turn over the presentation to Mr. Goldstein, who's been doing all the work on this cannabis ordinance with a little bit of help from his committee members. But we'll
A lot of help.
But we hope that the presentation will answer a lot of the questions that were raised by our residents. So Brian, I'm turning it over. Josh, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you.
Lisa, excuse me. Never mind. I don't know if you want to get the minutes out of the way, but never mind.
No, I think we'll just do the minutes at the end because we have people that, waiting and listening, I guess.
All right, sorry.
No worries.
But, so I was taking notes during the public comment. I appreciate all the people who came out to give public comment tonight and who've been invested in this, especially I know a lot of people from the Norwalk Partnership were here tonight, and they have been diligent and incredibly helpful in helping us figure out something that frankly is brand new here. One of the questions that came up in public comment is how this ordinance came to be, which was a really good setup. So let me start from the beginning. This ordinance is kind of a creature based on state law. In 2021, the state of Connecticut legalized and decriminalized cannabis. That should put away some of the questions that were coming up about whether Norwalk is legalizing it. It's not really up for Norwalk to determine whether to legalize it or not. In fact, it's already been legalized in the state of Connecticut. You're already allowed to possess it. and store it up to certain specified amounts. The law that was passed last year helps to reduce the school to prison pipeline that has disproportionately impacted communities of color, and helps to address the wrongs of the past on what has been commonly referred to as the war on drugs. This law also is designed to help support a growing sector that will create jobs, job opportunities, profit for small business, a securely regulated product, and yes, tax revenue. This presentation and this process has been a culmination of a months-long planning process that has involved extensive communications with community members, state and local officials, and experts. And what we're going to talk about tonight is sort of the first part of a two-part plan, which is one, the ordinance that we're talking about tonight, and then at a future point, we're going to be talking about an amendment to our zoning regulations. And Steve Kleppin's here to give us a little preview about that tonight. But tonight's public hearing is about the ordinance. Just very simply, sort of, this ordinance itself covers a few component pieces. It really does a handful of things. Some of the items that were mentioned in public comments are really good points, but they're kind of beyond the scope of what a municipality can do in an ordinance. But here's what this ordinance does do. So first, the ordinance, of course, will lift the moratorium that's been put in place by the council that would permit the sale of retail cannabis. One of the things that we did deliberately is make sure that our definitions, to the extent possible, mirror the definitions that were created by the state. When we talk about retail, of course, that's not medical marijuana. That's anyone over the age of 21 who can purchase cannabis. There are also dispensaries and what's called hybrid retailers. There are no dispensaries there are no medical marijuana dispensaries currently in Norwalk. But the definitions as are in our ordinance are the same for the most part as they are in state law. The ordinance also does limit the amount of retailers, so places that can sell retail cannabis in the city of Norwalk. This was something that we chose to do because the state actually lifted the number, the cap on how many retail stores could be in Norwalk per population. So we limited it to 3 to show restraint, to know that that this is new and that we need to sort of test the waters, but also provide an opportunity for people to purchase a securely regulated product. Then the ordinance also, a lot has come up in the public comments about regulation of public consumption. Very simply, if we don't regulate public consumption, you can technically smoke anywhere. So it's important that we pass these restrictions on public consumption so that we can try and alleviate as much as we can, and make it possible for police to issue tickets if people are flagrantly violating the ordinance by smoking on sidewalks or on the street or in parks or beaches. However, the state law requires us that if we regulate the use of public consumption, we must put in at least one designated spot. This was done in the state law, frankly, to try and limit and give people the opportunity to smoke who may not be able to do so on their own property. I think one concern that came up in the public comment was, why doesn't everyone smoke at home? Some people live in apartment buildings and may not be able to do so in their own building and may need a space outside to do it. And the state law requires us to have such a place. In our ordinance, and I know that we've discussed this pretty extensively, we've come up with a solution to satisfy this, but also be able to be flexible and respond to conditions on the ground. Very simply, I know Margaret Watt mentioned this about, basically the structure by which we designate a spot. Our ordinance designates the mayor as the person because the state law does say that there needs to be a designated spot, and we figured in order to make sure that if there's an issue with a designated spot and we'd be able to change it, if we subjected it to the ordinance process, as any of you who've been following the ordinance process knows, it takes a long time to change an ordinance. So we wanted to be able to ensure flexibility and be able to make a change for the sake of public safety if need be. which is why we structured our designated spot a section of the ordinance as we have and as we previously discussed. Of course, the ordinance with the penalties, some of which are curtailed by the state law, and some of which have to do with hearing officer logistical issues that we've discussed with the city and with the state, which is why sort of it is how it is. As we discuss in our ordinance, there is a reporting requirement where the police will be required to provide information for people, for the information of people who have received tickets and businesses that have received tickets, but specifically for people, information including demographic and gender information. The last, the last piece here is what we're calling the Norwalk Cannabis account. So one of the benefits of this law is that there is this 3% municipal sales tax. Now, municipal sales tax don't really happen. That's, most of the time when you pay sales tax goes to the state government. This is an exception to that rule. However, so this account is designed, and this was something we decided, it's not required by the state, but it's an account where all of the funds from this municipal sales tax will go. So it's all in one place. The state, however, I know there were some questions mentioned in public comments, and I saw some things that were reported about suggestions of where the money can be spent. The state has done what they call in government attaching strings. So very simply, there are 6 purposes, or 6 sort of themes, more or less, where we are required to spend the funds. And those themes, or really those policy areas, include youth employment programs, mental health and addiction services, services to people who are formerly incarcerated, streetscape and community improvements, youth service bureaus and municipal juvenile review boards, and community civic engagement efforts. So there are some pretty broad strings, but they are strings nevertheless. I know there were some comments about spending on infrastructure or law enforcement, but we are curtailed actually by the state statute and how these funds can be spent. We've also created, very similar to how we've done with outdoor dining and other ordinances, and this is why my friend Lamont Daniels is here, to talk about the creation of guidelines that will help both from an application, but also an understanding of how these funds are going to, are going to be spent. And then last piece, there is a reporting requirement where the Chief of Community Services will provide a report to the Common Council and of course to the public of how much money was put into the fund, how much of it was spent, and where it was spent. So that way there's transparency and accountability, and so people can know where this money is going. We hope, and I think one of the big X factors of the law, of course, is we don't know how much money the city would receive from cannabis, but there is a real intent from elected leaders and leaders in the city to make sure that this money is spent to, frankly, better our community and put forward a lot of community programs and efforts, many of which we have not been able to fully fund for a long time. So I think this could provide a tremendous benefit, but it's basically really one of a number of benefits of this law. That's the quick overview. I want to turn it over to Lamont, who could talk about some of the health considerations that we took into account, as well as the guidelines.
Great, thank you, Councilman Goldstein, and good evening, Norwalkers again. Lamont Daniels, I am your Chief of Community Services, and I'm always proud to think collectively and collaboratively, how we're thinking about this. So for the purpose of this conversation, and I know many may not have participated last night, I'm going to share a little bit of what I talked about, but then I'll expand on it a little bit more. I wanted to talk quickly, or not quickly, I don't know how much time I have, but just in terms of that, we really were very thoughtful when the ordinance committee approached the health department through our leader, through the health director, Dan Diamore, And I am aware that Aniela also served on the cannabis steering, the Norwalk Partnership Marijuana Vaping and Subcommittee, Aniela, who is our public health program associate. And so the health department was asked to weigh in on the ordinance from a public health approach, looking at cities and state regulations and how they control the legal commerce of cannabis products. That in some ways is similar, with similar aspects of the framework that was mentioned previously around framework used for tobacco and alcohol control. And so from a health perspective, we monitor town actions on the sale of cannabis across Connecticut. So we've made recommendations specifically around that. We investigated the health outcomes associated with marijuana. I think that was talked about through some of the public hearing from yesterday and today. And particularly that we're very aware, particularly around young people. What does that mean for young people, right? The current landscape of cannabis as a public health issue. And what are those policy recommendations on retail and advertising practices specifically designed to protect the public, as well as safe public use? So as a public health department, and we are members of the American Public Health Association, which is the national public health organization, we really relied on those policy briefs and literature that have been produced, because this is a new industry that's moving quite fast. One might get debate, but that's what it appears to be happening. And so the health department, we produced a policy brief with suggestions that have been articulated throughout the draft ordinance. Again, focusing on that public use retail sale in Norwalk and to make sure that it's carried out safely. So we develop a list of stakeholders likely to want a seat at the cannabis conversations, and many of you that shared yesterday or today were involved in those discussions. We looked at developing and have developed an inventory of high risk and medium risk facilities that warrant buffer space from a cannabis establishment. We looked at research and made recommendations, and that's reflected also in the cannabis. I think Steve's going to talk about that a little bit. And again, just want to highlight again that we are actively engaged in the Norwalk Partnership Marijuana Vaping Subcommittee, and see this as a partnership. This is not just the city making decisions, but we really want to engage and hear from our community leaders and those that have been doing this on the front end, doing this work for time and time again. And so in the ordinance, you will see, the areas around what was recommended around schools, youth serving facilities, and recovery rehabilitation facilities that are considered high risk. And we made recommendations there. And I'm not going to go into that. I don't think to go into the actual ordinance. But again, and we will continue to, based on what we heard today, is to continue to provide those opportunities that, should this move forward, to continue to have those discussions with our community partners. So Councilman, that's really the health speak. And I know I'm prepared to talk about 3%. I don't know if you want me to just do it all in one shot to keep things moving.
Great. The only thing I want to just clarify really quickly before you do that is that some of the restrictions about where retail stores can be in terms of that they can't be near schools or churches, that's going to be part of a zoning amendment that's not actually in the ordinance itself. Just want to clarify that, but then please take it away with the guideline.
Right, and thank you for that. And I probably didn't set it up correctly, but in terms of, I think there's important pieces that, from a city perspective, this just wasn't done in isolation. We weighed into from the ordinance perspective and also the piece to the zoning and partner with our zoning to look at, from a health perspective. So thank you for that clarification. And I think the other piece that, that many are interested in it is that we do see this as a very unique opportunity. And that unique opportunity is to, and we don't know what the funds were going to look like. We're anticipating it's going to be something significant, but what is important is that we want to be prepared and provide a protocol and a system and what that looks like. And so what is referenced in the, excuse me one second, I have some notes here that I want to make sure I don't lose height. So what is referenced is that as you all heard, that there is a 3%, as Councilman pointed out, municipal sales tax that was authorized to direct revenue to local governments for specific community reinvestments for the purpose of for those communities who have dispensaries. So Councilman Goldstein already mentioned what those are. But as pointed out in the draft, that revenue goes directly into the the city's cannabis trust account, which will go right back into the community. And so this is an opportunity to work collectively and collaborate with our partners. And I know it was mentioned that it should be called out in the ordinance, but there is intent to ensure that as we think about how to best utilize these funds, we want the recovery partners here, the prevention providers at the table, so we can think about what is the most comprehensive way, but also how do we measure impact? So, if this unique opportunity requires us that we have an opportunity to do something different, but do something different with impact. And the way to do that is to make sure we have everyone at the table, providing. And it was also mentioned that many of the social provider network, they've been doing this work a lot. So we would not make any determinations in isolation. We want to hear what are those best practices, what are those lessons learned, and then, create that strategy to look at how to best use those funds. And you're right, right now we focus primarily on the application process because this is still state funding. So there are some just requirements that are beyond our control, but there are opportunities to be innovative. There are opportunities to, look at the language specifically from an equity perspective, that Councilman pointed out. There was intent and there's language in the statute that a part of the funding, we want to look at those communities that have been most impacted from the war on drugs. And what does that mean? How do we serve our most vulnerable communities? And I think I'll close with this because I mentioned it last night, but I want to elevate a little bit more that, the state social equity council identified what is called disproportionately impacted communities. And I don't want to lose that piece. And what they use a formula around in Connecticut. We know what are those communities that were impacted by the war on drugs, and they created a formula. I think it's important for Norwalkers to know that there are 8 communities and census tracts here in our city that meet that criteria. So we want to look at those communities and direct funding into those areas, both from a programmatic perspective, those from a campaign and preventive perspective, but then just figuring out how do we engage those communities to make sure that whatever those investments look like, it's really making a difference and helping people's lives be better, right? I think that's the ultimate goal. And I think in closing, I will just share that I've been here for over 3 years. And so our department has a very, in my opinion, we have a really good, solid relationship with the community providers network. We're really excited to be working with one of the largest recovery network programs, as we'll be looking at having the embedded social worker. So we plan to continue those conversations to strengthen our relationships with these organizations so that when we are looking at making those investments, we know that they're investments that are not just meaningful, but are impactful.
Thank you, Lamont. That is really helpful. I now want to kick it over to Steve Kleppen, our Director of Planning and Zoning, and just to talk about, this is the second piece, but I think people should know that this is, as Lamont said, that this wasn't thought in a vacuum. This is a cohesive plan that the city has been working on for some time. So with that, Steve, take it away.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. And just to give a little bit of background and perspective, our office kind of tries to monitor what we can, the best we can with state legislation coming forward. So we knew that things were coming down the pipe with the cannabis legislation, and also knew that there was a lot to the bill that was outside the purview of planning and zoning, with a lot of the things that are in the ordinance, which are talked about tonight. So there was kind of a collaborative effort, which Lamont and others have talked about tonight. So I see like our department's role in this task is, if the city decides to go down the path of allowing the recreational cannabis sales, and also there are other things that we haven't talked about tonight, such as the growing of marijuana with the cultivators. And if those are the things that the city wants to see allowed within the city, where should we put that? What kind of constraints should we put around them? Where should they go? All those kind of things that, really fall in the lap of planning and zoning. So what we did was, took the best path forward, which is, let's see what other towns are doing to start with. And we were very fortunate to get some insights from other communities, what they're doing in terms of the ones that allowed or are allowing the sales. So we kind of took that as our, the basis points, basically to see what they're looking at in terms of the types of legislation. We had thoughts in terms of the type of conditions and constraints that we'd like to wrap around the regulations, or things that we think would pop up as concerns for the community. And also within the legislation, there are kind of some guidelines that give you a path to follow. For example, and this was touched upon by Lamont a little earlier, is how close should these, particularly for the retail establishments, how close should they be to schools and all levels of schooling, whether it's a preschool, whether it's a daycare, whether it's a high school. You also have concerns related to religious facilities, rehab centers, medical treatment facilities. So there's all different kinds of uses. So within the draft regulations, there's the potential to quantify how close any one of these retail establishments can be to any of these uses. And they don't have to be the same distance based on the use. You can treat them differently. It's really the ball's in your court on that end. As Mr. Goldstein mentioned, the initial legislation that was passed had a standard in there. You're allowed to have one retail establishment for every 25,000 people within your municipality. So Norwalk fell into the category of having 3. And then subsequently, the state lifted that restriction. But, it was decided that, stick with 3 for now. We talked about a lower number. I had concerns personally about just having 1, because knowing what happens sometimes when there's something new and shiny in town and there's a demand, and considering the fact that a lot of our neighboring municipalities are not allowing this, I could see where it would be a significant draw and could lead to a lot of just not necessarily issues with the retail store, but issues related to like parking and traffic. So we had concerns about that. There are some things that the legislation did that was smart, that would help the city when these open. The city is allowed to hire have police on at the the operator's expense to deal with issues like traffic and parking on the sites, to kind of handle that for a period of time while these establishments open, and people kind of get used to them and things settle out. Based on our research from what we talked about with other peer communities in the state of Massachusetts, for example, they saw a very big rush when these facilities opened. But then over time, they kind of settled down and operated much like other businesses do. The regulations on the state level did a good job of limiting the allowed signage, because I know that was a big concern. And I believe Margaret had talked about that with the billboards. They restrict the type of signage that the individual establishments can have. So there's not like, and I know this has come up a lot with the other shops in town that sell the related products, is the advertising is very restricted on where these businesses can be and can operate. So I think that's a plus. We've also put in some, at least, again, these are draft regulations that are up for discussion. We've put in some filters in terms of a minimum lot size, because one concern that I had was, well, if you allow these just on any size lot, if you had one of these establishments go into a smaller property, those smaller properties generally don't have as much parking as a larger multi-tenant plaza would have, where you could have like 6 or 7 stores. And the idea is being that those 6 or 7 stores get users to not necessarily a single park where they'll go to one establishment and then put their goods in the car and go to the next establishment. So you're not necessarily getting one individual going to each store. There's kind of a shared parking scenario. So we felt those kind of properties might be better suited to handle the influx, particularly at the beginning, which we think that might be a concern. The other end that's worth talking about is the cultivator side of it. For similar things like hydroponics, which I know obviously is not the same thing since there's not like the drug component to it, but we do allow the preparation, and we really look at it like a manufacturing use, like alcohol. If someone's making any kind of spirits, whether they're beer, wine, we have the down in South Norwalk, there's a place that makes, what do they make? Vodka or something down there. So anyway, we treat those like manufacturing, which would be the same kind of way we would treat the cannabis cultivation, but with a couple big kind of conditions that would wrap around that. One being that they would have to file a security plan, which we would, I haven't talked to the police chief about this yet, but it'd be something that we would get their input on. Same with the retail establishments. They'd have to give us a security plan, how they would tend to deal with those things. We'd also have beefed up standards in terms of how they handle their HVAC, which would be any kind of fumes generated from the property. We would want them to handle that and not have that be a nuisance, because I know that's always a concern, like with any kind of, whether it's tobacco or marijuana, is the odor that it gives off. So we want to avoid that. Last thing I'll mention, and maybe if I missed on anything, I'm happy to take any questions from council folks on this. We do restrict the hours of operation, similar to what we would do for like a liquor establishment. We try to kind of keep those uses similar. And there's also zero consumption allowed on the premises. So if you buy something there, you have to take it to a place which is allowed. So whether that's a public place or, on your own property or something like that. So I think that kind of gives the picture in a nutshell. Last thing I'll mention, which would be the real last thing this time, as Mr. Goldstein mentioned, the next phase, assuming the ordinance goes through, is the actual zoning regulations has their own public hearing process, public adoption process, which we would do with any zoning amendment. So all the retail uses would eventually become special permit uses, which also requires a separate public hearing. Our goal is to try to get that done before the end of this calendar year, because that seems to be in line with when the state will probably have all their ducks in a row in terms of rolling out the rules that go around that. So that's kind of our target date at this point. So I think we'll bring it up for discussion next month when we have some time on one of the Planning and Zoning Commission meetings to get their feedback on the draft regulations that we put together so far. That's about it for me.
Thank you, Steve. That was really helpful. There are a couple of things I want to point out of there that are really good. One, the cultivation piece. I did not mention this at the top. When we talk about tax revenue, what we're really talking about are two sources of tax revenue. Of course, one is property tax. The other is this municipal sales tax. The cultivation piece is a serious potential for Norwalk. I want to focus, before we sort of turn it over to other council members and sort of see what questions they have. One of the questions that came up in public comment was kind of, there are surrounding towns that aren't doing this. Why are we doing this? There are a lot of opportunities here. We also have a bigger, more diverse and different population than a lot of our surrounding towns. This ordinance, in combination with the forthcoming zoning regulations, provides basically a legislative way to create an opportunity and frankly seize upon an opportunity that the state has given us, that will not only create jobs and opportunities, bring in a new industry, and also hopefully bring in an industry with, when we say a securely regulated product, it means that people can have a level of confidence that when they do purchase cannabis from an establishment, that it's not laced with something illegal or something that is incorrect. And a lot of the standards that Steve was talking about, everything from HVAC to not smoking on the property, they're bringing in sort of a safe opportunity for people to purchase what is now a legal substance, is of paramount importance to both for public safety and also an opportunity for the city. I guess with that, I actually want to just note one other thing. I know there was a concern about enforcement when it comes to teenagers selling marijuana and treating marijuana the way we treat alcohol. I know, Margaret, you and I had discussed this before. We have reached out to the state's attorney's office for consultation on sort of the best way to proceed on that kind of thing and sort of what we can and can't do. With that, I would like to open up the floor to my colleagues and see what they think. And obviously, I know we spent a lot of time talking about this, but I do want to open up the floor. Am I?
John, I don't know who's chairing this, but
Brian had his hand up first.
I was going to let Josh lead the discussion as far as questions go. So how about it, Josh? Because You can direct
Okay.
it to the right
All
people.
right. Well, Brian, Tom, Nora, that's the order I saw.
Thanks, Josh. I heard, well, I guess first question is to you. We're voting on this tonight, pass to the full council.
Yes, this is voting on this to take it to the full council. That's correct.
Thank you. And then the second question is, from the presentation, Mr. Daniels said, we, quote, "We don't know what the funds will look like." Do we not have any kind of revenue estimates?
So the state
for
did
this?
provide, so the state provided some revenue projections. The city did not supply its own projections, but the state has projections on anticipated state revenue from cannabis, as well as what the potential anticipated municipal revenue is. I remember, I think we talked about this at an earlier meeting, so forgive me if the figure is incorrect, Brian. I think it was like the state office of like budget and research projected something in terms of municipal revenue, something in the neighborhood of, I think it was $18 to $20 million total that would be split amongst the municipalities that participate within, I think, 2 or 3 years. But I would go back and clarify that for you, but I'm pretty sure I'm right.
Sorry, 18 to 20 statewide?
So that was their projection. But that, of course, is not broken down community by community, because of course, the way the state law reads, the 3%, so it's 3% of every purchase that occurs in the municipality. So for example, Norwalk is surrounded, it's not just Norwalk, Norwalk is surrounded by a number of towns that do not permit retail sales. So people from Westport or Darien or New Canaan or Wilton who want to come and purchase retail cannabis can come to Norwalk and do so. 3% of that sale would go to the city of Norwalk. So the answer is yes, there is a state projection, but as applied to Norwalk and what Norwalk's number would be, couldn't tell you. We do not know. It is an X factor.
Okay, thanks. I'd like to come back, but I'll yield to other colleagues who have questions.
Then Tom Livingston.
Yeah, thanks. This is just sort of a factual question. When does our moratorium expire?
I think our moratorium expires in early December, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
Because it's a 9-month moratorium.
Right. And so, Steve, I think you said you probably weren't going to have this done before January. Is that correct? Did I hear you right?
And we were targeting end of the calendar year.
Okay. So we just have to, just a note to the committee that we're going to have to be cognizant of that, those timing, and may have to extend the moratorium. So we don't have a situation where a moratorium expires before the regs are in effect.
It's good to know. And Steve will have to work on the timing to make sure that we have enough time if that's necessary. And of course, with the hope that such a postponement would be temporary. Nora.
Thank you, Josh. And I really want to thank you again for the enormous amount of work that you have put into this. And I don't want to repeat myself. I'm really excited for the public comment today. I really appreciate everyone who took the opportunity to come and speak to us this evening. And I do hope that folks understand that this committee has spent several meetings over this late spring and summer discussing this in great detail. And certainly, this conversation tonight is the culmination of a lot of work that has gone into this, and a lot of thought and back and forth, and a number of revisions that I think were geared at addressing, some of the concerns that I heard raised this evening. Although I recognize that this is a compromise piece of legislation in the sense that it is a great social compromise addressing a complex issue on which people have a lot of different perspectives. I think that this bill is part of a larger statewide and national attempt to correct for the vast sort of over incarceration, over policing, really socially detrimental war on drugs, which did a tremendous damage to communities across this country, and in particular in Norwalk. And coming to a new sort of social compromise, a new place where we respect the rights of people who don't want to partake. And we've discussed in this committee at great length the issues around public spaces and sidewalks, why I personally feel like anything that can be smoked is different than anything that can be consumed in another way, but also the need to really balance that concern with the concern that we not use regulations on public consumption as a way of yet again over criminalizing particular communities, particularly low-income communities who lack potentially other options and other spaces in which to consume. So it is a balancing act. It is a balancing act that I anticipate will take months, if not years, to try to get right. This is not the first time this country has gone through these convulsions. We did this in the 1920s with prohibition. I think, you know, the historical record is clear from both prohibition and the war on drugs that trying to outright prohibit these substances leads to more harm in the long run than this kind of carefully controlled and thoughtful regulation around usage. So I really, again, I want to thank the committee. I want to thank Lamond. I want to thank Brian Candela. I want to thank Steve Kleppen. I recognize that there will almost certainly be changes. I expect that there should be changes. This is intended to be a work in progress, but I feel very confident with where the ordinance has gotten to, that we have tried to build in the right amount of flexibility to allow the staff who are going to be dealing day to day to try to allow the police department. And I should note here, one thing I did want to comment in relation to the concerns about enforcement. Our police department has spent an inordinate amount of time and money over the last several decades attempting to enforce marijuana laws. I don't anticipate that enforcing this ordinance is going to consume any more of their time or resources than their attempts to enforce marijuana laws under the strict prohibition. So I think that we are asking them to shift into a different and more community-oriented mode of enforcing these regulations, but I am not anticipating that where we're going to see greater expenses is going to be in police enforcement. It will be a transition, and I have enormous gratitude to the police department who will be working through how to transition and how to figure out how, again, to balance the public nuisance with our goal of treating marijuana as a substance equitably with the way we regulate tobacco and alcohol, and with a goal of providing support and harm reduction services and prevention services rather than incarceration as a solution to this problem. But I do think that, as I said, I do think this ordinance really represents an excellent and thoughtful compromise. I think that it really will serve the community well. And I'm very grateful to all of the tremendous amount of work that went into it. And I look forward to coming back to it in a year or two if we need to make tweaks. So thank you again very much. And I want to also thank our very thoughtful public participants and then issues that raise. I very much hope that these presentations have alleviated some of your concerns and have also helped you understand that there are concerns that may not be able to be alleviated, but we have done our best to hear them and to try to find a compromise that respects the needs of various communities in this city.
Thank you, Nora. Those were really thoughtful comments, and obviously you have provided a lot of work on this too, so don't sell yourself short. Dominique.
Oh, I just saw the chair's hand up. I don't know if that.
What about Tom?
No, Dominique, you're next. I'll speak after.
Okay, very good. Very good. Thank you, Councilmember Goldstein. I want to echo a lot of what my colleague, Councilmember Najelski-Eichner, has said about the work, the conversations we've had over months. And I really do want to thank everyone for their public participation as always, and these very thoughtful, diverse perspectives on, as Nora said, this issue that does elicit a lot of different opinions and perspectives. Especially, I have to thank our Chief of Community Services because of my role as chair, but also I know that there's been a lot of thought by the Director of Health, our health department, put into this, and that's been a major concern for me in particular. So I want to kind of piece out some of what we heard in the presentations, especially from our Director Kleppen. I know that the piece about proximity to schools is going to be in the planning and zoning piece of that, as you said. Is that something you feel very confident that will be highlighted and maintained by the Planning and Zoning Commission?
Yes, I would think there would be something they would definitely not want to take out of it. Yeah, I wouldn't see that as an issue at all.
Okay, that's good to get that confirmation. I appreciate that. And then back to what I know, Chief Daniels, you were talking about the regulations that you are going to be in charge of, your department is in charge of formulating, which I know we've been talking about over these past few committee meetings. So for me, I feel like in particular, I want to point out Margaret Watt's comments here, and it's based on the conversations we've had. It feels to me that a lot of Ms. Watt's comments will be dealt with in these regulations in particular. Is that right? Or they have already been addressed based on what, I don't know if there's like the draft per se that we can look to, but.
Yeah, I mean, Councilman, Mr. Gold, I saw you on mute, but I think I want to speak to, because I think it was referenced that, and I'm going to have to yield to you all because you are the experts in this. But I think the sentiment I heard was this has to be collaborative, and I want to say it certainly will be. My office is very aware of those that do work in this city. I'm proud to say every other Friday I host what is called the Community Provider Network Call, and some of you council members have participated just to listen in, and many of those that spoke also are aware of that call. And so we will continue that same sentiment around as we think about, again, understanding what that funding will look like. How do we use this thoughtfully, impactfully, so that we're really addressing what the law was intended to do. And that means to make a difference in the lives, one, in the communities that are most impacted, but looking at those specific populations, as Councilman indicated, youth programming, the addiction, mental health community, what are those resources that through this new funding stream that can just make that difference? We know the nonprofit community is already stretched and doing a phenomenal job as is. So how do we take advantage of this revenue stream to help them build capacity and resources, but also being very clear that prevention, and those are those educational campaigns, initiatives, because we have to make sure the information is just as impactful as those services, because we know that young people are impressive and all those things. And so we know that. And so to your point, Council, that we most certainly will use those same processes that we've used in other areas to make sure that our community partners are front and center as we think about what is that strategy to then make these investments.
Okay, thank you, Chief Daniels. I asked because I know that we've been talking in committee about the regulations as being separate from the ordinance, and how that actually allows us to be more nimble, more agile, more responsive to the community, because it takes months for us to reopen an ordinance. I mean, especially for folks who this may be their first ordinance committee, hearing on this. I can defer to the chair about the procedure, but I mean, that is something that is of note that we've talked about, which is that like the regulations allow us to be more nimble to make more immediate response to the community needs as we figure this out. As we've said, this is new. So I appreciate that, Chief. I do have one follow-up on that, but I want to defer. We prefer I go back to it. Okay. Oh, thanks, Chair.
Go for it.
Thank you. It has to do with the language that we talked about, I believe, last time with regard to Community Services Committee. At the bottom of page 5, it's where is this? 19B, and it has to do with the edit about discretion to deny in whole but not in part. So I know that was something we established last time. My question for that is, we're getting a summary of such applications. Did we land anywhere on summaries having names of nonprofits? I know it seems like a little bit of a minutia there, but I just wanted to clarify with my colleagues to remind me if we had decided something on that to put in the ordinance or not.
I'm sorry, Lisa.
Oh, no, go ahead, Josh. I was going to say, I thought we were going to maybe get into the need of the words of the ordinance itself. I know some people have some comments. So do you want to, are there any other?
I'll defer. I'll wait on that.
General comments that people have before we get into the nitty gritty of the ordinance itself.
Thank you.
I think Brian Meek has his hand up.
I do.
Oh yeah, wait. I'm sorry, Lisa. You had your hand up before.
I had my hand up next, and then we'll let Brian do it. So what I wanted to say about this is, twofold. First, I do want to thank Josh because he has taken this on in a tremendous way. And just so that the public knows, this is not a process that we just got started this summer. Last November, when it came into our attention that this was going to be legalized by the state, we began these conversations. And these conversations were both in this committee, along with the planning and zoning, the mayor's office. We had economic development. This has been a very, very thorough process. Every single department in the city, including the police department, has been involved in this. So we've done an extremely thorough job. And in some ways, I think that, Josh, we should be proud of the ordinance that we have before us, because this work in some ways is ahead of a lot of the other municipalities in the state of Connecticut. So we may well be leading the charge on a thoughtful ordinance considering the use and regulation of cannabis in a municipality. So I want to thank you very much for that. That very heavy lift that you've done, and you've really led us. I appreciate that tremendously. And we'll get into the details of the ordinance. I think that there are some other general comments, but I just wanted people to know that we've probably had, I guess, is this the third or fourth meeting where we've discussed this? It's been on the agenda. We've had public comment before when we've introduced this. So this is not something new to Norwalk. This is probably our fourth meeting on this topic.
Thank you, Lisa. And that's absolutely right. I mean, this has been it really has been a months-long process. I know that originally, actually, at the outset, someone who really helped us get our feet under us and begin to really figure out a lot of the issues is our former colleague, Tom Keegan, who I want to mention because he was instrumental, especially in a lot of the enforcement considerations. I just, I hope he's watching. If not, I'll certainly let him know, but we owe him a lot. Brian Meek.
Yeah, thanks. I do first want to recognize that, my colleagues here and staff, who's obviously hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of hours put into crafting this and thinking about it. I do like hearing the idea that there is an idea to look at private security in light of the hundreds of armed robberies, some fatal ones at dispensaries out west just this year. So that's definitely a big concern of mine. That said, I'm still where I was back in July when I first joined you. I just can't vote for this. I think this whole thing is just a solution looking for problems. I don't understand why, out of all the arguments, I don't understand why Norwalk needs to be on the bleeding edge. What I calculate to come up to not even a rounding error on our total annual budgeted revenues for the city. I mean, certainly it's going to be more than dog licenses, but it's not even going to be anywhere close to $1 million or $2 million a year, even if we service all of Fairfield County. That's just some quick back of the envelope math from published data from reliable sources in Los Angeles County and very mature established markets for the sale, the regulated sale of this. And, I just don't, I think we have bigger fish to fry. I'm old enough to remember that, we were promised that the $1 billion tobacco settlement, was going to be all used for wonderful prevention and care programs. And turns out less than 0.1% was used for that. Connecticut Lottery was supposed to pay for education. And, this just sounds like another one of those promises to me. And, it's coming on the heels too of a coincidental meeting last night with WPCA, where we just found out we need $50 million in upgrades in our wastewater, just the line system. It's not even, we won't even have a price on the plant until next year. Hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, Norwalk would have to sell like $20 billion worth of pot to come up with this money. So I think we got too much on our plate, too many other issues, and I don't think we need the problems here. And again, I appreciate the hard work y'all put into it, and you have the votes, and that's fine. I just want to let you know why I'm against it, and I'm going to continue to vote no on it. As you flesh things out, I still don't understand why we've abdicated responsibility for site location to the mayor's office, and that's regardless of who's mayor. I just think it's kind of the council worming its way out of this, and that's another opinion of mine, but that's my opinion. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Brian. I mean, obviously, I know you expressed similar views at our prior meeting. I disagree, but I just want to note just a couple things. I just want to clarify. First is, your back of the envelope calculations. We have no idea if you're right or if you're wrong. That's going to be a TBD. We'll see. But even if it were $1 million, there's a lot of good that can come from money at that level for a lot of the community programs that have been frankly underfunded in this city. So even one additional dollar, even some additional dollars to help move the ball in a lot of these important priorities is worth it. I also want to note, one of the concerns about your WPCA and basically why aren't we spending money on sort of other purposes? As pertains to the sales tax, we're limited on what we can spend the money on by the state. This is the classic strings attached scenario. Now, for property taxes from these places, that goes into the general fund and gets handled like any other property tax. But I just wanted to make that quick distinction there. But I don't want to sort of, I think that's pretty much all I've gotten response, but I know there's some people who wanted to do a little wordsmithing. So I think Tom Livingston, I think you had your hand up.
No, I mean, if you're into wordsmithing, yeah, I wanted to respond to Dominique's question because we did talk about names. It's in the minutes that I went back and looked. Sorry, Josh, while you were talking. We did talk about names and we decided, at least my recollection is that we provide for a summary. We don't really say what's in that, but we did have that discussion. So I don't know if that answers your question. And if you want to get into wordsmithing, I can.
Okay, Brian, would you mind putting the ordinance on the screen?
Mine are really minor, really in the category of nits. So
Sure, just give me a second.
Just 4 of them. So.
There you go.
So Josh, Lisa, if you want, I'm going to go ahead.
Go for it.
Okay, so just the first one is in the definition of product manufacturer. So it says a person that is licensed by the state to obtain cannabis, extract and manufacture products exclusive. What, I think something's missing there. Or it doesn't read right to me. You see what I'm saying? To obtain cannabis, extract and manufacture products exclusive to such license type.
Honestly, I mean, I
can look. Is that what the state says?
But it's probably exactly what the state said.
Could you just check that while I give a couple of little things?
Sure.
Something's missing there to me. Retailer, it says a person excluding a dispensary facility and hybrid retailer. I think we mean or there, because I don't want somebody to claim it has to be both.
Yes.
Yeah.
Going to section 1.5 B. The consumption of cannabis and cannabis products shall not occur at any outdoor dining establishment as defined in this section of the code. Do we want to say, as we have in other places, as the same may be amended, because if we do amend our outdoor dining ordinance, which we're likely to do?
Yes.
Okay. And the only other thing, we don't say time to time here, Brian. I've looked at that. If you want to, you can look at how we did it elsewhere, just to be consistent. I think we just say as the same may be amended.
Yeah.
And Brian, if you could just do a search, this is in the category of super nit. We capitalize chapter someplace, and other places we don't. So I think it's more that you don't capitalize it. I mean, I'm sorry, more we do capitalize it, like we don't always. So just do a search on that.
Yeah, I'll capitalize. I'll do a Control F search and capitalize all the chapters that show up.
Yeah,
I'm looking at SB 1201, which is the original legislation, and the product manufacturer means a person that is licensed to obtain cannabis, extract and manufacture products exclusive to such license type.
okay, all right, we'll leave it. So we'll go with the state interpretation, whatever that is.
Yeah, yeah, and by the way, for people out there, we did that. That is a deliberate move to make sure that our definitions are consistent, so that way there isn't an issue, and that we don't have legal issues with people parsing definitions.
Yeah.
That way we
And-
maintain consistency.
Yeah, okay, and Brian, just don't put from time to time on the 1.5B, because we don't use it up above.
So just leave it as is.
No, leave it as the same may be amended, period.
Gotcha.
And that's my little nits.
Sounds good to me.
Yep.
Um,
Any other committee member have questions about wording or nits, as Tom might call them? Dominique has her hand raised. Josh.
Hi, Dominic.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Councilmember Goldstein. No, just a thanks to Tom, because that was my recollection as well, that we leave it as is in the draft, which I believe makes sense. And so thank you for that. I have no other nits other than that. That was the one thing I wanted to follow up on based on the, I'm very happy that the visible multilingual signage is here. That's a fantastic addition, and I do think that that's a really positive addition we've made in the past meeting or so. So thank you all.
Great. Is there any other, I can't see everybody's hand, so if I don't call on you and you have your hand raised, please speak up. But if there's no other comment, oh, now we're back to the screen. I think that we can have a motion to take this to Common Council and then take the vote. So Josh, would you like to have the pleasure of?
I would. I'd like to make a motion to take the this ordinance, the cannabis ordinance, or as we call it, the regulation of cannabis ordinance, to the Common Council, full Common Council at our next meeting.
All in favor? So I count 2, 4, 6 of us. Oh, I'm sorry, Tom, do you, oh yeah, okay, we got it all. Anybody opposed? One vote opposed, so it's 6-1, we take it to.
I think it's 5, I think it's
6 of us,
one, two,
right?
three,
1,
6
2,
to 1. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I thought I counted right. Great. So that having been done, we can now open up the, I guess we still have public comment that we could do, although the only agenda item really was the cannabis. So do I still need to do that, Brian? Have public comment on the public hearing that we just had?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So I open it up to public comment. If anybody would like to raise their hand to have any further public comment on the agenda in general.
Brian, did I need to say as amended?
Yes.
All right. I realize I just didn't say that.
Does that change anybody's vote? If so, please raise your hand and we'll revote. Okay. Keeps everybody's vote the same.
There you go, Brian. As amended.
Let's just give everyone a minute who is on the attendees who might be thinking about commenting. See if anybody still wants to comment after hearing. So we have one person at least, the presentations and then all the comments from council members. So this is Marjorie. Marjorie, just take yourself off mute and you're free to talk.
Hi, I'm Marjorie Madden. I live on Silvermine Avenue. The only thing that struck me as very disturbing was coming back and talking about that you could, in fact, change 3 establishments and saying that perhaps it could go to more. And I think that the residents of Norwalk would find that totally unacceptable. Unacceptable. I mean, I can't even imagine that. What is it going to be like? Liquor stores and Dunkin' Donuts? Is it going to be on every corner? I think 3, I mean, I'm not for it at all, but seeing as it looks as though it's a done deal, I guess we can live with 3. but I can't see how the public in Norwalk can live with more. Thank you.
Alrighty, so unless there's something else, I'm going to close public comment and we will turn our attention to the minutes.
Do we have anybody else that wants to comment before we do that?
Okay, I think we can close public comment.
Okay.
Alrighty, so I'd like to have a motion to accept the minutes, then we can talk about whether or not there needs to be any changes. Mr. Livingston has moved that we accept the minutes. I have a couple of nits myself, and then I'll turn it over to other people who might have nits. I noticed that Mr. Meek's first name is misspelled, so we should correct that. Are you with me, Brian? Or are you just going to follow?
Yeah, I'm making the changes as you guys go through.
Yeah, I just think it's easier to do that. On the second page in the third paragraph, it says she addressed the idea of consumption spaces, noting, I think we should just say noting its dangers, not noting that it was dangerous. I think the word it's should just replace that it was. You see what I'm, yeah. Alrighty.
Yep.
Then my next, I have like on page 4, I have a couple little other things I wanted to clean up. So it's in the 4th paragraph down. It says, Mr. Huberman was asking. So the second sentence says, I'm going to read the sentence the way I want it to read. Ms. Shanahan said, our ordinance specifically said, and here's the change, the designation of a smoking place is the mayor, is within, wait, now I've lost myself. Our ordinance specifically said the designation of a smoking area is the mayor's discretion, so the place could be moved if there were issues. Does that make sense? Yeah. Then in paragraph 1, 2, 3.
Hold on
4,
one second.
Yeah.
I have, Ms. Shanahan said, our ordinance specifically said that the designation of a smoking area is the mayor's discretion.
So the place could be moved if there were.
So the place could be moved if there were issues.
Yeah. Okay, so then you hop down to the paragraph that starts, she addressed an equity issue.
Yep.
And it says she said it wasn't important to ensure. I think that this is Nora's comments, but I'm pretty sure she said it was important.
Nora?
Is that, would you make that change, Nora?
Sorry, I'm muted. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. It was on my list to raise my hand about.
Okay, good. And then in the next paragraph, the last sentence, it says, Ms. Shanahan said that there was a lot of revenue, not money for the city. Instead, there was a lot of revenue available to the city as a result of cannabis sales, comma, and to not take advantage of this revenue source. Would be a dereliction. So that's that. Okay, so those are my changes. I think that other people may have some others. I know that Mr. Goldstein had a couple or two.
Yeah.
Right?
Brian, I got a couple. On page 3, where it says on section 1-9, section B had been rewritten about the annual solicitation of application for funds form accounts. It's probably from, but I'm not even sure what the reference is here. Actually, of application for funds for the cannabis account. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Funds for the it's no. Yeah. For application for.
I think that should be from.
Yeah, I think it's, Brian, it's rewritten about the annual solicitation of application for funds from.
Okay, for funds
From the cannabis account.
Gotcha. All right.
There we go. Then there's the paragraph that says Ms. Johnson said it, that it felt like. Ms. Johnson said the function of the vote was that you had to approve all or none. He said, David, is this you? because I
Where's
was
the you
wondering who
going?
this was.
Who's the he or she?
We don't know.
Dominique, you're muted.
That was one of my questions as well, and I wonder if that's
Maybe it's
you,
she.
Josh, or Lamont Daniels, or that is a case of me, because that sounds like something.
I think it's you, actually. Maybe it's she.
It sounds like something I might have said. We can go back to the YouTube, but unless that might be also something you said. But
That
Um,
wasn't me.
Concerned.
I vote you, Dominic.
okay, we've
All right.
eliminated David. That is something I would have said, and I was speaking at the moment, and so it's either me or you is what I thought, Josh. So
That's what I
Okay.
thought. One of you-
Brian, then after that little break there, where it starts, Mr. Goldstein said they were required.
Yep.
So Mr. Goldstein said they were required by state law if they allowed the regulation of consumption to designate a public spot.
Gotcha.
That's all I got.
And Dominique, you still have your hand up. Do you have further amendments you'd like to make?
I do, in that same paragraph where we talked about who is the attributable person. Yes, right there. Thanks, Brian. I believe the first sentence isn't quite capturing the spirit of what I meant. I think what I intended in the moment, obviously, is that the Community Services Committee, based on what's said before, right, if we did not, I think the conversation was around, do we allow an all or none vote on, or are we allowing our committee to talk about individual applications, voting them up and down? So that was my understanding. And so therefore what I meant to say was this idea of would leave itself open to people demanding changes on individual applications as opposed to a proposed recommended slate or set of applications, however we think that, but that's the gist of it. As recommended by the Community Services Chief. That was the spirit of it. I believe that, yes, I believe that were my two. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Does anybody else have any further comments to clean up the minutes? I want to keep this legislative record clean because it is a complicated issue. So that's why we went to this level of detail on the minutes. Okay, hearing none, Mr. Livingston, I think moved that we accept the minutes. Can I amend your motion to say accept the minutes as amended? Great.
I'm sorry, one more tiny nit.
Oh, good. We like nits.
Yes, so on page 4, last paragraph, Ms. Nadjelski proposed, there's an extra the there, so it should be Ms. Nadjelski.
I'm sorry, you're at page 4?
Yeah,
Nora?
page 4, last paragraph, first sentence of that paragraph. Ms. Nadjelski proposed, there shouldn't be a the between proposed and that.
Yeah, okay. Got it.
Okay, back to the vote on to accept the minutes as amended by all of these changes. All in favor? That is unanimous. We're all set. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn. I think we've covered all business. Great, thank you. Motion to adjourn. All in favor? Great, thank you guys. Josh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
A very heavy lift. You did a fantastic job of leading us tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good
Thank you,
night.
everybody.
Night.
Good night.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Bye.